Welcome to YT Preacher. I'm J-Man, and I'll be your YouTube preacher. Thank you for joining us today. I would like to encourage you to continue to work on your devotionals with this, so as part of that, I'd suggest that you read our verse today. Today's verse is Genesis 1:6. So go ahead and stop right here, open up your Bible, and read Genesis chapter 1, verse 6. When you're done with that, come back and join us. All you gotta do is hit pause, and then it'll pick up right where you left off. Okay, so Genesis 1 6. And God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate waters from waters." Genesis 1 6. This is a very interesting verse, and the fact that I'm going verse by verse makes it a little bit more confusing because this verse in and of itself talks about things that are a little odd. It says waters from waters, and it talks about an expanse. The deal is here that we've just gotten to the first part of the second day, and there's a little bit going on that we've kind of got to look at and really understand better. So that's why I look at these commentators and I see what they say. And they have a lot to say about all this. So I try to boil it down and make it as simple as possible. And from what I can gather, when we look at things that are scientific, like the fact that we have water, ice, gases, and plasma being the different states of liquids, we can know that there was definitely waters, but maybe some of the other kind of waters was a gas and not so much of a liquid, which is different when we think about it, because when I think about water, I've got a cup with water in it and I've got another cup with water in it, and they're separated, and there's an expanse between the two. That's not what the author's describing here. He's describing this orb that appears to be covered in water, and God's saying, let's take water and separate it from that. What some people believe is that, or what a lot of the commentators think, is that there was this other waters was like gas liquid that was surrounding the liquid of the water, and the two had to be separated, and that's how you get the expanse. And then they go into talk about raining and snowing and sleet. We'll talk about that later because it's not as important here. What's important here is that there's this gap between two different types of water. We also just saw light being separated from darkness. In the last paragraph of verses, in the first day, one of the first things God did, he said, "Let there be light." Now, notice he didn't say, "Let there be water." He didn't do that. There was no "let there be water." He says, "Let's separate the waters." But he did say, "Let there be light," and then he separated the light from the darkness. So now he is separating, just like he separated the two, the chaos. Maybe there is a gas going on here. Maybe there's just waters that don't need to be there, that he's just making the earth more livable for man. We also, when I'm looking at these commentators, they also bring up something called the Septuagint, which is typically referred to as LXX. If you see that, that's referring to something called the Septuagint. What is the Septuagint? That's a good question. The Septuagint is the Old Testament written in Greek. What does that mean? It means that somebody who spoke Greek rewrote the Old Testament so that he could hand it out, or she could hand it out to those to those who knew Greek. It could almost be like an early Christian Old Testament where they would hand it out so that people could get that along with the letters of Paul or other letters. Paul, having wrote most of the Old Testament, makes sense that they would try to be handing those out with that. And Paul's being about the law, and we're in an early law area. I'll get into the early law area a little bit later, but That was just my mind thinking about why the Septuagint's important and trying to help explain that to you. As far as this text it being in English, the Septuagint isn't important, but they talk about it because for explanation purposes, when we look at words that are in Hebrew that don't quite make sense, we have to look at other forms of the text. Because somebody wrote them out in Greek, we look at the Greek and we say, well, how does this one make sense? And that's how the two wind up merging and meshing, and we come up with ways to say, okay, now we can better understand it. And then there's something we have to talk about. In the English Standard Version, it doesn't talk about this, but in other versions it does. It's something called the firmament. Well, what is a firmament? A firmament, a firmament is kind of confusing. Basically, how a lot of the commentators describe it is having been beaten out to be made strong and being hardened or hammered to be hardened. Basically, the firmament is something that it's the expanse in the King James Version, where the water on the top is separated by something hard from the water on the bottom. And that becomes the firmament. It could be an atmosphere, it could be something else that we don't have anymore, that we don't understand anymore because we don't need it anymore. This expanse becomes a space where life can live. We're going to get into later animals, plants, and people. They need a place to live. If the gases are there, or whatever this waters is there, that won't allow them to breathe, it needs to be removed. I want to thank you all for watching. I hope that you're enjoying these. Please leave comments, questions, prayer requests down below. Also, if you haven't done it yet, subscribe. That makes me happy. Thank you for watching, and God bless.